Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. It is another very beautiful afternoon. I'm addressing you from Nairobi. This is the East African Law Society Women Lawyers Committee monthly law series. Welcome. I can see from the participants present, we have participants drawn from all over East Africa, which is a pleasure. So today, before we get into today's topic, because it's a topic that most of us are really looking forward to interrogating. Let us deal with the some housekeeping rules first. We want this webinar to be as interactive as possible. However, if you have any very pressing questions, just type them on the Q&A section, because we shall have a plenary session after both speakers have finished giving their presentation. So we don't want to interrupt them, because maybe what you are asking is in the latter part of the presentation. However, you can feel free to type your questions on the Q&A section after that. But there's also a very interactive chat section. You are free to post your comments, reactions. You can even post your greetings on the chat section. So our topic today is air and space law in East Africa, and we are going to specifically focus on opportunities for lawyers. But what exactly is air and space law? This is a very niche area of the law. I know there are some of us who are wondering whether our speakers are going to talk about aliens, or whether they are going to talk about visiting space, or whether they are going to talk about the maxim that lawyers were taught about in Latin, cujus, solam, and etc., about how ownership is up to the center of the earth and up to the sky. So I will not pretend to be an expert, because I am here to learn like everybody else. And today we have with us as our panelists experts in this field. We have two speakers today. We have Dr. Rogers Manana, and we have Ms. Karen Luogo. Rogers is a Kenyan and Karen is a Tanzanian, but they are all professionals in this very niche area of the law. Dr. Manana will tell us about the theoretical foundation of air and space law, and Ms. Luogo will talk about the practical application of air and space law. So let me give a disclaimer before I introduce Dr. Manana, because if I read his whole bio, it's going to take us around 30 minutes to read his whole bio. So I'm going to give just a very abridged version of his bio. And Dr. Manana holds an LLD. This is a Doctor of Laws in Public, Constitutional and International Law, and a Master of Laws from the University of South Africa. Just a minute. From the University of South Africa. I was referring to a document, then it just decided to disappear. So I have to trace it again. Yes. Dr. Manana has over 17 years work experience in both government and private sectors. He holds a Doctor of Laws. This is an LLD in Public, Constitutional and International Law, and a Master of Laws degree from the University of South Africa. He is the author of a doctoral thesis named Integration of Unarmed Aircraft Systems into Civil Aviation, a study of the US, South Africa, and Kenya. He has also authored numerous articles on air and space law and two chapters on international air law. He also holds a Master of Arts in International Studies and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Nairobi, together with a postgraduate diploma in law from the Kenya School of Law. He has a Bachelor of Business Administration, this is BBA, from Newport International University, a diploma in criminology and social order, a diploma in public relations from the University of Nairobi, and he has trained in international air law by ICAO in Montreal, Canada. He is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a former Secretary General of the East African Community Students Union. He has worked for the Kenya Airports Authority for over 12 years as a senior officer, that is aviation security senior officer, and as well as a legal officer. He's a certified national inspector, and he's amongst the few experts. Note, he's amongst the few experts in the field of international air law with a focus on unmanned aircraft system in Africa. He's a member of the LSK, the ELS, and the Public Relations Society of Kenya. He has served as vice chair of the board of Airport Housing Cooperative Society and is a board member in several schools here in Kenya. He currently serves as an elected member elected to the Board of Trustees of Kenya Airports Authority Staff Pension and Superannuation Scheme, and is a part-time examiner for the Council of Legal Education in Kenya. So you will all agree that with all those degrees, diplomas, and several masters, we are in the presence of greatness. So over to you, Dr. Manana. We are eager to hear from you. Karibu sana, Daktari.
Thank you very much, Anchi, for that elaborate introduction. I really appreciate. Allow me to thank my co-presenter, my good learned friend, Karen. I was telling her last time we were together, we were in Bujumbura in a symposium, and that when COVID had just started, and we were lucky we were not locked in Bujumbura. Happy to see you all the way from Dar. Having said that, allow me to thank the East African community, the ELS, East African Law Society, the CEO, David Lugano, my other panelists for this, Hafasa, of course, Anchi, after reaching out on a short notice, as the chairperson, the Women Committee, the Women Lawyers Committee for the East African Lawyers Society. Allow me, I've been tasked, my task is to talk briefly on the theoretical path, and my good learned friend Karen from the mighty Leiden University will be handling the issues of practical. She is a practitioner with the Tanzanian Civil Aviation. Having said that, allow me to also thank all the participants who are logged in and those who are still logging in for this new area, this new niche. Of course, we have had people with a lot of reservations. I have also seen people wonder what air and space law is all about, but we want to demystify this myth and probably just make it very interactive, as Angela had already mentioned, so that those even who are not in the industry, our colleagues from the bench, the prosecution, can also equally understand. I've also seen my colleagues who've also logged in and a few other friends all the way from Burundi, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda, the Pearl of Africa, and my colleagues here in Kenya. Having said that, allow me to very quickly ask the IT play a small video that I had shared so that we can start from there as a part of introduction. IT, please. Do we have volume, Haiti? The video, we don't have a volume on it.
I think there is no audio on the video. I think there is still no audio. Still no audio, but we can see the
Yeah, maybe
visual.
we just proceed and
Okay.
is it done? IT.
I think audio has to be enabled from the settings. In the meantime, maybe Dr. you can just proceed
Okay.
as it's being sorted.
Okay.
Captain, all passengers are evacuated. You're the last one.
Typically, the captain will stay until everybody's off, and he will verify that the airplane is empty.
The pilots have put their passengers' safety first. But now, it may be too late for them.
You're gonna have to climb up to the window. You first. Sir.
All 737 cockpits are equipped with an emergency escape rope. It's designed to help pilots exit through the side window. But it's no easy maneuver. Then, fire on an airplane can quickly become lethal. Incredibly, on Flight 120, all 165 people on board have escaped unharmed.
I've never heard of any evacuation where somebody wasn't hurt. To get this many people off in such a dire circumstance in a very short period of time with no injuries is miraculous.
Okay, I think that's all. I'll quickly share the clip, my PowerPoint, but allow me to very quickly introduce the topic on air and space law. As IT shared the slides probably, but still we can progress. Let's go to slide. The objective, what's the objective of this module? Basically, we need to assess the application of air and space law and its applicability in East African region. We also need to understand the purpose and the rules of the Chicago Convention. As I will describe to you, you will quickly know what the Chicago Convention stands for. We also need to explain the structure and the function of ICAO. For those of you who are not conversant, ICAO is International Civil Aviation Organization. In its mandate of the lawmaking processes. And we also need, I will describe the relevance and the function of the ICAO, and very quickly identify some of the challenges and emerging issues, including the applicable other relevant conventions. Looking at the topic of today, we will quickly look at what are the opportunities for the lawyers in East Africa. And in that regard, many people have always confused when you talk of international air law and space law, people ordinarily think you are talking about the same thing. But allow me to very quickly explain that international air law majorly is a branch of international law, which my good friend Karen will quickly touch on in her presentation, that directly or indirectly deals with civil aviation issues. And in this context, it deals with the aircrafts, whether light or heavier than air, and all the rules that govern the air navigation related issues. Now, having looked at the issue of international air law and the governance it is relating to air, particularly on civil aviation, we quickly look at what does space law say. And the international air law is actually governed under the Chicago Convention. But when you go to space law, it's as much as they are all related to the atmosphere, issues of space is actually a law or a body, it's a law, international law that governs space-related instances. For example, issues to do with the treaties and agreements on how to share the outer space, particularly on issue of rescuing, sharing, freedom of use, and the space materials that can be used therein. So looking at the space is beyond the skies you see. People look up and they presume that above here, it's only heaven. But in law, we know there's an airspace where we have a planet like the moon, like Jupiter and others. So the International Convention, the UN body, the committee came up with 5 conventions that deals with the space law. Among us, the 5 convention is Outer Space Convention of 1967. Let's go to the next slide. The Outer Space Convention that actually basically deals with how states across the globe can respond or share the outer space. Because if you are going for navigation or you're going for exploration, then you must have laws that govern the outer space. Now, in outer space, we also have agreements, several agreements, and among them we have the agreement on the moon, or the moon treaty. All these are conventions that actually guide countries across the country. Now, let's move to the next slide. Yes, those are some of them, what I mentioned to you, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. We have Rescue Agreement, we have Liability Convention, Registration Convention, that all deals with the outer space, way above the skies. And the Moon Agreement, of course, we have heard that people have gone to the moon. Now, lawyers and international law practitioners and the UN developed such agreements to govern, so that if you go to the moon, we should not reach the moon and start fighting among the states. Then we must have a harmonized agreement that governs such exploration. Next, we quickly look at the, let's go to the next slide. Yes, the scope. Of course, the objectives of international air law is actually to develop a harmonized way of fostering planning and development of international air transport. Then why do we have law, airspace, international air law? Is to have fostered transport and harmonized way of handling the sky. I was telling somebody, a friend of mine, who asked me if he want to purchase an aircraft, can he fly straight to Mwanza? Can he fly direct to OR Tambo without authorization? Then we must have bilateral agreements negotiated by those rules so that you are allowed, let's say, to fly from Wilson Airport to OR Tambo or Pole International Airport in Addis Ababa, or Mwalimu Julius Nyerere in Tanzania. So looking at that objective, very quickly, international air law governs all aspects of air travel, including the bilateral agreement that states have to negotiate and enter into. Issues of airlines and pilots are also discussed. And from the clip that you watched, that was an airline that was flying in China. The pilot touched down very safely, but immediately they touched down, hell broke loose, and the aircraft caught fire. The rules of the commander of the aircraft, who is a pilot, is that he must ensure safety of all the passengers first. I was wondering whether if it was a matatu, will the pilot or a driver wait to evacuate all the passengers and be the last person to exit the matatu? But under the international air law gives the pilot, for example, in a clip that I showed you, an obligation to ensure that the safety first of the passengers and ensuring evacuation. Now, let's move to the next slide and look at the legal framework of air law. The legal framework of air law as a theoretical aspect is actually international treaties and customary international law, but its primary source is actually on conventions, and the major convention that is relevant to this aspect is actually the Chicago Convention of 1944. When we talk of the Chicago Convention of 1944 that was signed on 4 December, before then, we had what was called the Paris Convention that was promulgated in 2019 in Paris. But even with the Paris Convention of 1919, states were not having a consensus. And during 1919, you remember what was happening was the era of the First World War. But throughout the development, the states started quarreling and having difficulties, particularly on the sovereignty. If you look at the Chicago Convention, particularly on the sovereignty of states, the states have jurisdiction from owning the land all the way to the air. So in 1944, 54 states converged in Chicago in USA and negotiated for this very important convention known as the Chicago Convention that now guides the issue relating to civil aviation. Now, the Chicago Convention that was signed in 1944, states have been ratifying them. And currently, as I speak to you now, all the 193 states have ratified. Of course, Kenya, many states were ratifying as per, immediately they gained independence, they were able to ratify so that they are guided by this international convention. Now, the Chicago Convention gave rise to what we call the International Civil Aviation Organization, what is now known as ICAO, which is a specialized agency, UN agency to run affairs of civil aviation. The ICAO is actually located in Montreal, Canada, and its work is to ensure that we have a safe environment for air transport. Let's move to the next slide. The National Civil Aviation, of course, I've explained all that as a specialized UN agency, and its headquarters based in Montreal, Canada. Now, under Article 37 of the Chicago Convention, ICAO has the mandate to guide states, Article 37 of the Chicago Convention. Now, mandates states to develop their own domestic laws. And under this convention, to support the convention, we have 19 annexes. 19 annex from Annex 1 to Annex 19. For example, Annex 19 deals with safety management system. Annex, let's say, 18 deals with the dangerous goods. Annex 17 dealing with security. Annex 14 dealing with issues of airdrome. Annex 9 dealing with issues of, let's say, facilitation. Annex 6 dealing with the operation of aircraft. And Annex 2 probably dealing with the operation of air. Now, all these annexes, Annex 15 probably dealing with environmental issues, are annexes to the convention helping the ICAO to guide member states to develop their own domestic legislation. Since international law, we don't have international police to police the air navigation and all that. States are mandated under the convention to develop their own domestic laws. Those of you who are privy to international law, you know the domestication processes of law, of international law. So at the regional level, particularly in East Africa, we have the Civil Aviation Safety and Security Oversight Agency, currently located in Entebbe, Uganda. That's what I've called CASOA. These are regional bodies, for example, that help ICAO to achieve its mandate regionally. But we also, ICAO has also regional offices, like in South and East Africa, we have an office in Nairobi, Kigiri, that deals with the harmonization and supporting the regional office in the region. We have another offices in other regions like EU. We have Egypt dealing with the Northerners and other regional entities across the world. Having said that, we look at our own, because we are East African, and I am a proud East African. CASOA, which is based in Entebbe, also supports the work of civil aviation and might particularly main issues of safety and security in the region, so that we have a standardized way of rules applicable at our airports, and the relevant appropriate bodies that deal with the enforcement are the civil aviation agencies, like Kenya Civil Aviation Authority or agency, this Tanzania Civil Aviation Authority. These are now the responsible bodies at the state level that are actually mandated with either to ensure there's compliance, either to license pilots, to ensure airports are up to standard, ensuring of issues of security and safety and environmental related issues. Now, from there, these are bodies which are actually supporting ICAO, because ICAO cannot be all over, but ICAO undertakes this function through what we call the continuous monitoring and the continuous auditing processes, safety, continuous auditing process for security, safety, and other issues related airport related operations. Let's move to the next slide. I looked at what we call emerging trends international air law. One of the areas that I've been very passionate about is the emergence of the new technology. Of course, technology lawyers, drafters who are lawyers will tell you the law will never precede technology. The law will trail technology, because technology emerges very quickly and lawyers have to rush very fast to know how they can now legislate and catch up with this new technology. Now, the advancement in technology has actually led to the new revolution in regard to operation of the airspace. Particularly flight operators now make use of the new technology to optimize their routings, what they call the routings, particularly after the bilateral agreements. Now, under this new technology, we have what I have called unmanned aircraft systems. And I'm happy, Anchi, you read a part of my article that I wrote on unmanned aircraft systems. These are actually what people, laymen or laywomen, call drones. Drones are emerging as alternative, not real alternative, but they're emerging at a very high speed and now lawyers, particularly in Kenya in 2020, that's when we developed what we call the UAS regulation. And this is the area I researched on during my doctoral thesis. And when I started research in 2015, I never knew that it is really going to really take shape. But currently, as I speak to you now, I was with a friend in Kitui, and a drone was commanded to deliver a ring, just a ring, you know, in a wedding, whereby people are wedding and helping this technology. A ring was put in a drone, and the drone was commanded to go all the way to the altar to deliver a ring to those who are willing, who are about to get, who are wedding. Another issue is that I saw in Malawi where people want to propose to each other, and probably you are shy from proposing to each other. You do a letter and put in a drone and with flowers and chocolate and command it to go and send it to your fiancé. This is emerging technology, and drones also fall under Article 8 of the Chicago Convention, what we call the pilotless aircrafts. Now, this emerging area needs to be regulated, and the lawyers must come in handy to help relevant agencies to regulate. Having said that, the issue of human rights, the element, each constitution, different constitution, if you look at the constitution of South Africa, the constitution of UK, the constitution of Kenya, Tanzania, they have aspects of protection of fundamental rights, the right to privacy, and as you protect these rights, we have aircraft such as drones flying over your property and intruding into your privacy. Then how do you handle this kind of aspect? These are some of the emerging areas that lawyers are grappling with. Look at how they can regulate so that they can also comply with issues of human rights. The issues of the stakeholders' engagement and all that in vis-a-vis managing harmonious civil aviation industry is an issue that can not be left behind. It has to be on the table for discussion. Let's go to the next slide, where I now discuss very quickly through pictures, because people say that pictures speak better than words. Members, if you can look at this picture, this was in September 11, 2001. Then I was a young boy in Nairobi watching TV, and I looked and I was surprised. 2 aircraft just flying in New York City, crashed into 2 twin towers, crashed and killed many people. Now, before this instance, an aircraft was never contemplated to be a weapon of mass destruction. People were inclined towards people armed with guns, maybe explosives, maybe hijack, but they had not contemplated a law that could deal with people using aircraft as weapon of mass destruction. Probably people will deal with the law on unruly passengers, offenses committed while on board. But this is one of the areas that has now brought the civil aviation industry and the ICAO to very quickly amend the standard and recommended practice to comply with the emerging trends. Having said this, we have other instances, particularly these are challenges that are encountered as we continue practicing in the field of international air law. The next slide talks about this gentleman known as Richard Reid. Look at that, please look at that shoe, members of this distinguished webinar. This is a shoe that ordinarily, if a gentleman or a lady putting it on, you will not know that there are issues that have been concealed, not issues, but explosives actually concealed under the sole. So occasionally you are at the airport and you are told, please remove your shoes, remove your belt, and you feel inconvenienced. This gentleman had explosives, actually shoes, the shoes were well put on and he had nice sole, but underneath were explosives. And because of time, I don't want to go to the integrities of what happened. This is a gentleman and the airline that he was able to enter and cause an act of unlawful interference. So occasionally, while at the airport, there are rules and regulation and the law that also govern the aircraft. And that's why people ask, why am I subjected to a lot of screening at the airport? Because there are offenses committed while on board, and there are those offenses committed while at the airport. Now, if this gentleman had been intercepted at the airport, probably the offense that committed to the blowing up of the aircraft will not have happened. The next slide, I very quickly look at the offense known as sabotage. On 3rd May 1986 in Colombo, inside an airline twister, a bomb exploded and the tail section was actually completely destroyed. 16 passengers died plus 40 others injured. This is what is happening, and you as advocates, you may be called upon either to defend the accomplices, you may be called to think on how to have new regulation, but partly in passing these some of the offenses or emerging challenges happening. Quickly, next slide, I'll look at that's actually the aircraft and how it was damaged just because of the sabotage that happened at the airport. The next clip, I quickly look at the man parts. Look at this gentleman aiming at the aircraft. This is part of the offenses and the emerging crime that happened to aircrafts, and they happen while on board or probably from the ground, targeting the flights on board. Those of us here listening who are pilots will agree with me that a lot of accidents of air accident happen when a flight is landing or taking off. So the proximity of the man-portable air defense systems, particularly in this continent, has been on the rise, and the lawyers have been called upon to find on how to review punishment and the legislation in this regard. The next slide, I quickly look at the opportunities for the lawyers in East Africa. This is part of the presentation. I'm sure a lot of advocates here want to hear. What is this civil aviation? What is it all about? Where can I get a job? How is it beneficial to me? There's a time I was doing a presentation for the Judicial Institute here in Kenya. I was presenting a presentation to the magistrates and the judges. And believe me, that some of the offenses that we were discussing had never been contemplated or been discussed by the magistrate. They were not even aware that that was actually offenses. So we had a long discussion on how to then deal with these offenses. Which law do we apply when particularly they are arraigned in courts? Part of the opportunity for lawyers, allow me to tell you, is academia. Just the other day, my friend Joan Chesoni, who works at the state law office here in Nairobi, quickly was reaching out and telling me Karen was looking for me. And I told her, oh, I know Karen. Then she was wondering how. Joan and Karen were classmates at Leiden University in Netherlands. And I told her, Joan, unfortunately or fortunately, in this field of air and space law, there are very few experts and we know each other by name or by jurisdiction. So the area of academia, if you want to study, let's say you want to teach, the University of Nairobi, which is a premier law school here, they have a unit at LLM known as International, Air and Space Law. The lecturer teaching that unit is my good friend, Dr. Ken Obura, who was also trained out of the country. And year in, year out, you find few students, including my friend Angela here, who was interested to pursue it, and the quorum was not even realized. So if you want to go to University of Dar es Salaam and study international air law, space law, maybe you may not have that feasibility. Many students who want to aspire to go study, they go actually out. Either they were in Leiden University, the McGill University, California State University, or they were trained by ICAO in Montreal, like myself. So you find that in academia, there is an area that in Africa, particularly East Africa, even if you go to Makerere, I've been in all these universities when I was the East African Secretary General for the Student Union. I was able to visit all these universities and I looked at the establishment. We don't have capacity. So, ladies and gentlemen, the opportunity is here in the academia. You can advance your studies and be a lecturer, both locally and internationally. We can also talk of issues of negotiation of contracts. Now, if Boeing 77 want to purchase, or KQ or Air Tanzania or Air Uganda want to purchase a Boeing 77 from Chicago or from Carolina, Northern Carolina, or from Canada, who will guide them in negotiating these contracts? Who will draft for them the contract? You need experts of international air law, advocates. So all advocates cannot be experts in everything. I'm sure we agree on that, even if we say the law is clear, when it's not very clear sometimes. Now, drafting. Of course, you negotiate and you draft this contract. These are opportunities for lawyers that the lawyers need to be sized it. I'm sure my friends working for the Civil Aviation Authority, both here in Kenya and Rwanda, they will agree with me that in drafting these regulations, then you need experts who will guide. Probably the regulations keep on changing. As I said, Article 37 of the Chicago Convention provides for the standard and recommended practice and domestication of laws. You need lawyers who are conversant to help in drafting. Quickly, it's a practice area. People practice. You go to International Court of Justice, you go to our courts here in Africa, and we have aviation-related dispute. You need practitioners who are also conversant in matters of air and space law, particularly international air law. Issues of space may not really come in handy because space is at its infancy stage. I saw the other day Kenya established the space agency, but in America, this has been ongoing, like the NASA. Not NASA or the political party that would formation that was in Kenya, but we have a body specifically known as NASA for airspace in US. Now, the issue of consultancy in civil aviation, to airlines, to space agencies such as the NASA I was talking about, to UN, to AU, to East African community, to like Article 1, so no, Article 92, 3C or thereabout of the East African Treaty actually talks about establishment of the aviation agency, which I alluded to, the Civil Aviation Safety and Security Oversight Agency. So you need consultants at all this level. If you talk of the AFCAC, the African Civil Aviation Agency that is in Senegal, you require experts, particularly to help in consultancy from time to time. The State Law Office and other agencies, I have spoken, example of my good friend who was a classmate to my panelist, Karen, who is doing a good work in Nairobi at the State Law Office. And I'm sure there are no, I'm not so sure how many there are. If she's in the room, she will probably tell us more about that during the plenary session. So having said that, these are just part of the areas, the niche areas that we can probably focus on. My colleagues in the room, if you feel, the list is not exclusive, it's not conclusive, but it's work in progress. As I conclude, I move to the next slide for the interest of time. We have some of the international legislation or conventions, specifically the laws that are now in place dealing with issues of offenses committed while on board. Where do you take these suspects who committed an offense while on board on high seas, flying from Edmonton, Canada, all the way to Australia? Where do you try these people who committed offense while on board? They became unruly passengers, and those are the issues that surround issues of international air law. Now we have the Tokyo Convention that was actually signed and ratified in Tokyo in 1963, dealing with offenses and certain other committed on aircraft. I had already alluded to that earlier. We have the Hague Convention. When we talk of Tokyo, Hague, this is where the convention was negotiated and signed, which deals with the suppression of unlawful seizure of the aircraft, particularly signed at the Hague. If you hijack an aircraft and the aircraft was going to Lubumbashi in DRC or to Juba, and then you divert that flight to Cairo, Egypt, then these are the legislation, international conventions that you are breaching, and you are likely going to be charged. We have the Montreal Convention, actually also suppression of unlawful acts relating to civil aviation, safety and security, signed in Montreal. We have the supplementary protocol on unlawful acts of violence at the airport or civil aviation. So you come at the airport, you are drunk and disorderly, and you want to cause disturbances here and there. Please, you advise your clients that you are likely going to be charged or contravening this international convention. We have the Beijing Convention. I'm not talking about the Beijing Convention of the women, the rights of women. I know my good friend, I'm speaking, they converted already. this forum was organized by women lawyers. But we have another Beijing Convention of 2010, which amended the Montreal Convention of 1971, that actually address issues of cyber attacks. We have other emerging offenses like cyber attacks, the issues of plastic, the radioactive materials, where you move in and people get exposed to it. So this convention of 2010 basically deals with that kind of offenses. Now, let's move to the next slide. Sorry, I'm taking slightly long time also of explanation. I ordinarily don't use slides. I like just talking and doing a presentation without making reference. But for purposes of us having a reference material, I thought it's important to go through this. We can quickly sum up and say that there's a position for us lawyers, particularly in the field of international air and space law. The field is dynamic. People may think it's emerging, but it has been there, as you know, from 1944. So as the technology takes shape and continue revolving, the globe requires new lawyers to come together and probably look at the different ways of partnership and engaging so that we can support our state. Having said that, the East African lawyers, Madam Anche, I must thank you. In 2007 or thereabouts, we had a problem in East Africa where a delegate from Burundi going to Tanzania will pay a visa. Now, then we were student leaders. We said, let's break these barriers. I want to slightly degenerate and create opportunity for our lawyer friends here. That why should we have a work permit to work within the East African region? Why should I require a passport to go to Rwanda or to Uganda? And where I'm born at the border of Kenya and Uganda. I just walk back to Uganda, walk back to Kenya. Why should we have this documentation? Now, while we were students, we organized what was termed the Great Trek from the University of Dar es Salaam to the University of Nairobi, to Makerere University, to National University of Rwanda in Butare, all the way to National University of Burundi with almost 8 buses. And I'm talking this because some of my colleagues from Burundi, Rwanda, Tanzania, and they are listening. And at the border, the national intelligence agencies of those countries had to say, no, these are large number of students. What do we do? Then, to cut the long story short, the petition was done to East African Ministerial Conference in Arusha and the heads of state summit. And I'm happy to report that through such efforts, for example, some countries like Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, ease it up. You can go to Uganda with an ID, and the issues of work permit or paying fees for students or within the East African region, higher fees was addressed. So all these opportunities called for you lawyers to sit down, re-energize and see where we can partner and practice on this emerging area of air and space. Thank you very much. Allow me to stop there and invite question and answers, but maybe before we move to question and answer, our moderator, if you give me a little latitude, we may want to hear my co-presenter because some of the questions or answers may be actually what she's going to address or in her talking, and so that we can jointly handle questions together. If that's amenable to you, I would appreciate.
Thank you very much, Dr. Can we all appreciate Dr. for that very elaborate breakdown of air and space law. And for those who would wish to propose to their significant others, Dr. has given us 1 or 2 pointers, not just the old-fashioned going down on one knee. You can send a drone. Now that we have, he has laid the theoretical basis of air and space law. Our second presenter is very ready to take us through the practical aspect of air and space law. Our second presenter, before I introduce the second presenter, I have seen there like 2 questions. from the chat section, but I humbly urge those who have asked questions, Mr. Kennedy Kilonzo, to hold on for Ms. Luogo to give her presentation. Then we shall address all the questions during the plenary session. So our second speaker is Karen Florence Luoga. She's a legal officer at the Tanzania Civil Aviation Authority and is an advocate of the High Court of Tanzania and court subordinate thereto. She specializes in air and space law, corporate law, contract and commercial law, intellectual property and arbitration. She holds an LLM in advanced studies in air and space law, which she got in the year 2017 from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. And she has an LLB from the University of South Wales in the United Kingdom, which she attained in 2011. Over to you, Ms. Luogo. Karibu sana.
Asante. Thank you, Angela. And thank you, ELS, for organizing this discussion in air and space law. I'll be presenting on practical application. Can you see my slides?
No, we cannot see your screen.
My slides, you can't see the slides?
No. We can't see the slide yet.
Okay. Now?
We still can't see your slide.
Maybe IT can help from the other end.
Yes, maybe you can share your presentation via email to IT.
Yeah.
The same email that sent the link.
Sorry?
The same email where you were sent the link, maybe you use that and share your presentation with IT to share for you. IT, Elman? You have the presentation. In the meantime, you can just continue while IT will set up your presentation.
I'm looking for the email.
Okay. As you're looking for the email, maybe Dr. Manana, you can address the question that had been asked by Mr. Kennedy Kilonzo, and he alluded to what you had said towards the end of your presentation, and I'll read his question verbatim from the chat section. What would it take to domesticate the East African airspace into one area so that a flight from Kampala to Nairobi is considered to have been a domestic flight? Would this in turn mean more affordable tickets and encourage inter-EAC, that is East African community travel? Dr. you can address that.
Thank you very much. That must be Kennedy Kilonzo, not Kilonzo. Kilonzo, not Kilonzo, Kennedy Kilonzo.
Kilonzo,
yes, fortunately he was my classmate at one time, and he's a member, the Yala Member of Parliament in Arusha. Thank you, Ken, for your good question, my brother. That is an aspect that probably the East African Legislative Assembly need to take up, and through a bilateral negotiation, as I had stated earlier on, if we have a negotiated routings whereby we don't associate, of course we associate with our respective states, but we stop looking inwardly and working in silos as small states. Then we negotiate for the EU market. Then we have a negotiated routing whereby the decision is made at the East African Legislative Assembly and ratified by the heads of state summit. Then that way, we will definitely have cheaper flights operating regionally. I know majority of you have been out of the country. If you are moving from India in one jurisdiction, you are going beyond DRC, but you are paying 6,000 air flight. It's equivalent to a bus. You are moving from Canada, Montreal, to the other place in Toronto. I used 7,000, equivalent to 7,000 Kenyan shillings. So why are we then in East Africa having paying more to go to Dar es Salaam or to Kampala or to Rwanda or to Bujumbura? I agree with you, Ken. That's an aspect that can be negotiated at the East Africa Legislative Assembly, and I'm happy to have you listening to this and contributing as a member of Parliament for IALA and my former classmate. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
You are very welcome. Karen, are we ready or we take another question? Yes, over to you, Karen. Let's listen into Karen's presentation. Karibu sana, Karen.
Asante, Angela. I will be presenting on the practical application of air law in Tanzania. First, I'll define the air law. Air law is a body of rules governing the use of airspace and its benefits for aviation and the general public and the nation to the world. The objective of aviation law are to promote the safety and security of the aviation industry and to have safe and secure skies. Because of the unique characteristics of aviation activities, any meaningful appreciation of the regulatory regime in Tanzania that controls the aviation industry can only be achieved by first considering the international air law. International air law is essentially a combination of both public and private international air law. Public international law refers to the agreement between nations and is often in form of international conventions or treaties. Private international air law relates to legal jurisdictional issues, that is, scope of legal authority of a state or body when the conflict or ambiguities arises between the laws of the different states with respect to aviation activities. Next slide, please. For public international law, the cornerstone instrument of public international air law is the 1944 Convention on International Civil Aviation, popularly known as the Chicago Convention. This particular treaty established the core principles permitting international transport by air and led to the creation of the specialized agency which has helped states to cooperate together under the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. More than 192 sovereign states have ratified this convention, and in doing so, have agreed under international air law to be bound by the technical and operational standards developed by ICAO, as detailed in the 19 annexes to the convention. To provide a system of harmonized regulations for international aviation operations and eliminate conflicts or inconsistencies between the domestic aviation laws of states. Next slide, please. For private international air law, the Convention of Unification of Certain Rules Relating to International Carriage by Air, signed at Warsaw, the Warsaw Convention, was the first milestone of the private international air law and has been amended numerously times by additional protocols, convention, and private initiatives. Convention for the Unification of Certain Rules for International Carriage by Air, signed in Montreal, and consolidated. This convention consolidated all Warsaw conventions, Warsaw System conventions in one simple text. It creates greater international uniformity of legislation and reduces the need for costly litigation as to applicable legal regime. The next slide. Tanzania Civil Authority. It is usually the responsibility of a local regulator to draft the appropriate civil aviation regulation or rules that will give legal effect to the state's obligations under the treaty. In Tanzania, the local regulator for aviation activity is the Tanzania Civil Aviation Authority. Tanzania Civil Aviation Authority is the government body that regulates air services Airport Services provides air navigation services in Tanzania. It was established by the Civil Aviation Act, Cap 80, and operates under the purview of the Ministry of Works and Transport, section of transport. The authority plays a critical role in ensuring that an appropriate air transport system is established and sustained to support the development of the country. As a regulator, the authority promotes regulatory environment that is conducive to the growth of a vibrant and competitive air transport industry. The practical application of air law in Tanzania. Now, I've mentioned the Chicago Convention. In Tanzania, we've implemented the Chicago Convention through the Civil Aviation Act, Chapter 80, revised edition of 2022, and its amendments. And the ICAO annexes to the Chicago Conventions have been implemented by the civil aviation regulations in Tanzania. The acts provide general power to make regulations, liability for damage caused by aircraft, detention of aircraft, review and appeals procedures, complaints and dispute resolution, and enforcement and compliance. The regulations are applicable mostly to the air operators in Tanzania. They set rules to be complied with in order to operate safely and provide the enforcement procedure for any contravention of the regulations. Next slide, please. Here I've shown how the ICAO annexes have been implemented in Tanzania by regulations. So Annex 1, we have a regulation for that up to Annex 19. Next slide. And the next one. However, Annex 16 and 18, sorry, can you go to the previous slide? However, Annex 16 and 18 is still on draft. My colleague, Mr. Manana, has spoken on the annexes already. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. For the private international air law, Tanzania has implemented it by its civil aviation carriage by air regulation. These regulations cover documentation and duties of parties relating to carriage of passengers, baggage, and cargo. The regulations further cover the liability of carrier and extent of compensation for damage, including compensation for death or injury, for damage to baggage and cargo, for delay of passengers, baggage, and cargo, limits of liability, advance payment, excessive carriage, and right of recourse against third party. In addition, carriage by air performed by a person other than the contracting carrier is covered, including respective liability of contracting and actual carrier, mutual liability, servants, agents, and the invalidity of contractual provisions, as well as offenses and penalties. The practical application of the law as of the Chicago Convention, we see it in through operators. If the operators are complying with all the requirements set, criteria set under our regulations that have been implemented under the ICAO annexes, that's where the application of the law is seen. And in order to operate in Tanzania, you see the ICAO annexes, the regulations set all the criteria for operating in Tanzania, the requirements of registration, making sure you have a certificate of airworthiness, rules of the air, and everything. As of carriage by air, this is more of liability towards the air carrier, and it's on the consumer side. So we have scenarios where maybe a plane was delayed or canceled, and the carriage by air will will govern that when that scenario happens. We also have a consumer complaint unit that handles all the complaints in relation to passengers, cargoes, and baggage, lost baggages, and everything. Next slide. And that's the application of the international air law in the Tanzania. Thank you all. Asante.
Thank you very much, Karen, for the presentation. Now, members, it's time for the Q&A section. I will start with another question that had been posted on the chat section by Paul Asimwe. And the question is, what regulations apply to planes that can also be used on water bodies? Do they require regular civil aviation regulation? Karen, maybe you can take that one. The question is, what regulations apply to planes that can also be used on water bodies? Do they require regular civil aviation regulation? Karen, unmute. We've not had anything you've said, unmute. Yes, you have now unmuted.
Okay, can you repeat the question?
The question is, we've been asked by Paul Asimwe,
yes.
What regulations apply to planes that can also be used on water bodies? Do they require regular civil aviation regulation?
So long as it's an aircraft, it will be regulated by the normal regular civil aviation regulations.
Okay, thank you. I hope, Paul, your
Maybe
question.
Dr. Manana can add on to that.
Yeah, actually, Council, yes. That is correct. All flying aircrafts, whether they are balloons but are regarded as aircraft under Article 8 of the Chicago Convention, must be regulated by the specific domestic civil aviation agency.
Thank you. We have another question that's still open at the Q&A section by Vitalis Luseka. This one is directed to Daktari, and Mr. Luseka is asking whether we are likely to have common legislation in East Africa community regarding the UAS. Daktari?
Thank you, Vitalis Luseka, my good colleague here in Nairobi. And I'm impressed with the way you've been passionate also on this topic. It's possible. However, it has not been achieved. These are the aspects that those of you who have read my thesis proposed and recommended to the East African community is actually harmonization of the civil aviation regulations, and how then do we have a joint UAS regulation that is applicable to all the 5 or 6 sister states? Because sometimes you may not have control. You just realize that you are in Busia or in Butare in Rwanda, and your UAS or drone flies slightly above the airspace of Burundi. You know you are committing an offense if it's not authorized by that specific state. Or I'm in Namanga or in Lunga Lunga, and then my UAS that was covering a wedding, taking videos for the wedding, flies over the territory of Tanzania. And Mama Suluhu says, yes, this is an intrusion and it is against the law. So we need to move. It's work in progress, Vitalis, I must admit. But looking at where we're headed to, we have light at the end of the tunnel. The current Director General of Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, Emilio, was actually the CEO, EG, for the Civil Aviation Safety and Security Agency in Entebbe. And he was also passionate in this. And I even saw the presentation from the Tanzania Civil Aviation Agency. They are also looking at how can we have this harmonized regulation.
Thank you very much. The next question, I will direct it to Karen. Stephen Ouma is asking whether Tanzania has specific regulations on UAS similar to the Kenyan aviation, Kenya Civil Aviation, that is UAS stands for Unmanned Aircraft System Regulations 2020.
Yes, we do have a regulation that regulates, for us, we call it remotely piloted aircraft system. We do have them, and about similarities, I think they're similar. I haven't seen the Kenyan regulation.
And just a follow-up question on the issue of aircraft devices. Angel Ampurire is asking whether hot air balloons are also governed by civil aviation rules.
Yes, they are governed by civil aviation rules.
Yes.
Yes, maybe our moderator, Kazom Anchi, yes. Just a little recap, we used to call the remotely piloted regulation for Kenya of 2017. You know, in 2015 or thereabout, ICAO gave what we call the operation of unmanned aircraft manual. And they also proceeded to give a circular in October of 2015. Now, they guided states to develop their own domestic regulation on drones or unmanned aircraft. So Kenya in 2015 or thereabouts, started the path. But unfortunately in 2017, the regulation that was promulgated was actually nullified by Parliament on 3 grounds. 1, lack of sufficient public participation. 2, infringement to privacy, because the regulation was not so clear on how they are going to regulate on issues of privacy. If you are flying a drone over property and people, if I'm taking a bath in my compound and you quickly fly a drone over my homestead, what are the repercussions? So issues of privacy were not well addressed. 3, issues of payment of fees. There was no sufficient engagement in all the 47 counties. So when the 2007 regulation was annulled, we embarked, of course, I was participating from the periphery, on other legislation now that could address the parliamentary concern that gave birth to the UOS regulation of 2020. But countries such as Rwanda and South Africa had enacted their regulation as early as 2015 and thereabout.
Thank you very much. Members, remember we had said that this would be a very interactive session. So if you'd want to ask your question live, or if you would want to make a comment, feel free to raise up your hand. Then we shall, then we are going to, you're going to be given an opportunity to speak. Joshua Gift has an interesting question, and this one, I think both our panelists can give their views on that. Joshua is asking that we have recently seen a rise in jetpacks. Is there an East African state that has taken note of that and put up a framework on how to regulate them? We start with you, Daktari.
Please, I was looking at the chat questions because there are people like there's Arnold Angamba, who is actually sending question all the way from the McGill University in Canada, and he's actually following. I know it's in the morning in Canada now. I was just looking at the chat. Please repeat your question so that I can handle it appropriately.
Yes, the question is on the Q&A section. It's by Joshua Gift. He's saying that he has recently seen a rise in jetpacks. Is there East African state that has taken note of this or the jetpacks? We'll hear from you, then a word from Dr.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairperson. The internet kept on fluctuating and I was not getting clear, but I'm imagining you are talking about the jet fuel and issue related to that.
No, jetpacks. The question by Joshua Gift on the Q&A section. On jetpacks, not jet fuel.
Oh, okay. So the question is in regards to harmonization of the jetpacks or what? Because I don't
Yes, whether there's any state within the East African region that has regulated jetpacks, or whether there's any state that has any regulations to do with jetpacks and how jetpacks can be regulated. Yeah,
probably let me quickly run to the international laws where now all that falls under. And like Article 616 of the Constitution of Kenya, international convention ratified, we become party to those conventions. So I cannot pinpoint specific state particularly, but I know there are progress regulation in this, but the international law has, as I said, through the Chicago Convention actually handles what my good learned friend is asking. So basically, that is, if there are states which are left behind, it's still a work in progress that is being worked on, but the comfort is the fallback, the international law. As long as states have ratified, if they have not gone ahead to domesticate, then they must apply, the international apply. Maybe my learned friend Karen may want to add.
Yes. Your thoughts on that, Karen?
I'm not aware of that. I'll need to do further research.
Okay, back to the chat section. There's a question from Pascal Mwanyika. This one is directed to Daktari, and his question is simply on compliance of the conventions. What is the recourse against an aviation authority that does not comply with the convention in place? An example would be an aviation company filed IDERAs for aircraft. The IDERAs were countersigned. Yes, the authority derailed, did not deregister the aircraft, assuming there was no reason to deny such deregistration. Maybe you start by telling us what IDERAs are, then you answer the question. Karen, I can see you are raring to answer that one. You can proceed, then we'll hear Dr.
Okay, basically the issues of compliance as asked by Pascal, they are specific. If it is a state, if it's a state non-conformity, then a state will be penalized. And some of the penal that go towards this, the ICAO has what we call the council, whereas 33 states sit and make decisions. Now, decision can be made by ICAO to punish a member state that has violated the law. Now, amongst the penalties that can be imposed, one, flights can be banned from entering your jurisdiction. States will be told, we are no longer recognizing, we are not assuring you the safety to fly this specific country X or country Y. So the heavy penalty that may come along, and you know, if you are relying on tourism or international civil aviation industry, then you don't want to infringe or breach this law. If it's a company, for example, what Pascal is asking about registration and the registration marks, you see, East Africa, we don't have companies manufacturing aircrafts. Even these drones you see, most of them are imported, and they must have what we call registration marks of the country of origin. And if they cease to operate in Tanzania, then they must be deregistered. So if they are not deregistered, so that they are removed from the list of the Civil Aviation Agency, or if they are deregistered and you continuously use them, maybe there's what we call airworthiness. Every aircraft must be assessed to comply with the airworthiness, safe to fly. So the registration is part of the compliance mechanism imposed by the respective CAA, where Karen here sits in, for example, the CAA of Tanzania, CAA of Kenya can actually deregister an aircraft and stop it from operating in a jurisdiction. I hope I've answered Pascal well towards issues of compliance. It can be specific to a company, to an individual, or to a state. Including pilots, sorry, including pilots. Pilots can also be registered from to fly. Yes.
Karen, do you have anything to add? Some thoughts on that, on deregistration?
No.
Okay. Dr. There's another question that goes to you, I think, based on the topic of your thesis, of your doctoral thesis on drones. And the question is from Dennis Abisai. He is asking whether we have an international law that regulates the use of drones when there is war between countries, like, for example, what's happening in Ukraine.
Thank you, Dennis Abisai. Dennis Abisai is one of the senior counsels in Kenyan Parliament, National Assembly. He happened, we were during our LLM together in South Africa. And thank you for listening and asking and putting me on the hot seat, my brother. Last time I saw you was during the lawyers conference in Mombasa. Yes, international law applicable to drones that are flying. What is available? Let me first of all delimit this topic. We have civil aviation and the military. The airspace divided into two. We have the military operation wing and the civil aviation operation. Now, issues of civil aviation are not regulating. The Chicago Convention is not applicable to military aircrafts. I think we needed to make that clear. So, use of remotely piloted aircrafts. You know, we have very heavy machinery which are used in war, like the Ukraine and the Russian war. Even as early as 19th century and 18th century and even 17th century, the Germany's balloons, the balloons that were flying in Germany during the First World War. These balloons and the heavy unmanned aircrafts that are used in war are governed under the military regime, where the civil aviation which we are handling is not within its realm or camp. But having said that, if we go to international law that governs UOS, actually ICAO, what it has done through the issuance of circular 320 of 2015, no, of 2011, 320 of 2011, and the operation of aircraft manual that was issued in 2015, just gave guidance to states to develop. So we don't have a unified international regulation that actually prohibits flying of the drones. However, the drones are also considered as aircraft. So if we have a law that is applicable to regulate aircraft like overflight, you know, you cannot just overfly a territory without authorization of that state because of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and all related aspects. If you look at Article 1, Article 2 of the Chicago Convention talks to that effect. So what happens, we have no unified specific to UOS, but we have a unified international convention that deals with all aircraft. Now, all aircraft means, if you look at the definition of aircraft under Article 8 of the Chicago Convention, includes pilotless aircraft, which are drones now. But we have argued, like in my thesis, I'm happy my learned senior may have read it. I have proposed that we need to have harmonized international regulation handling drones, because drones which are remotely piloted can easily intrude into other jurisdictions if we don't have international, then let's have regional, so that SADC and East African Community and ECOWAS can have a memorandum of understanding and come up with how they regulate. Because this is an area that we cannot continue burying our head like ostrich in the sand. It's an area that is here and we must find a way of looking at it. So Abisai, while you advise our parliaments in parliament, please tell them as they talk to this discipline, we see how we can have a harmonized way. But in the interim, let's use international law that governs manned aircraft.
Thank you very much, Dr. Remember, members, you are free to raise up your hand, then you can ask your question live. I have seen so far no one has raised their hands, but if I look at the chat, the Q&A section, I can see Mr. David Kasibante has asked a very long question. I would suggest, David, you raise your hand so that we allow you to talk. You ask. Yes, your hand is raised. Kindly ask your question. I can see it has part A, B, and C. I think we would like to hear from you. David, you are permitted to talk. Just unmute and ask your question. David Kasibante, unmute and ask your question.
All right. Thank you very much, moderator. My name is David Kasibante. I'm a policy analyst and a space lawyer from Uganda. This has been a very beautiful session and I'm very happy to be part of it. My questions, however, are relating to the current state of space and to see how the community, the East African community, can benefit from space currently. My questions are simple. So previously we have seen that the African efforts in space, even though we have a few satellites over there, we've largely not registered that much growth, even though we have, been in space for a while. And it's saying that Kenya and Rwanda currently have satellites in low Earth orbit, and Uganda is also launching one in October to the International Space Station. How do we leverage within the East African community, possibly, to prevent us not gaining the benefit, the accrued benefit that we would like to see in space? What's the best format that we can take that would enable the countries in the East African community to benefit from space? Then secondly, how can East African communities benefit from the Artemis Accords? Or are the Artemis Accords a good deal in your estimation, Doctor? Would we gain something out of them, or is it a bad deal and the East African countries can sort of find their way around? And if it is a good deal, how best can we approach it? Should we approach it as the East African community, or we should approach the Accords as individual countries and on individual negotiation levels? Which then leads into the last question, that which is the best policy that you would say? Would we survive better with individual state policies, state space policies in East Africa, or would an East African space policy be a better deal, or even the upcoming African space policy? Which of these do you think would benefit the region better? Thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. over to you. That is
My
what
brother-
we call a basic structure question.
My brother David Kisebate from Nangulu Hills in Kampala. How are you? He has asked a fundamental question. Allow me to handle it from the basic structure approach. One, the issue of the individual state policy, airspace state policy, and the East African communities airspace policy, which has not yet been implemented. Of course, states like Uganda has made efforts to develop the airspace state policy at the domestic level. This is in response to what I had presented earlier, what we call the Outer Space Treaty or Agreement of 1967. So the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 actually gives states, the individual states now, because all these states are ratified that convention. Now, the international, the Outer Space Convention of 1967 gives states on how they can collaborate, because space, you see, it's not like land which is owned by Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda. Space is let me use the common language, no man's land. Any state going there, but when you go there for exploration, you can deplete, you can damage some of the issue, and they probably fall to the earth or deplete the environment. So each state has been mandated at individual domestic level to develop their own, what we call the airspace agencies. And in developing airspace agencies, they develop the policies at the domestic level. However, what David is asking from the Pearl of Africa, from the nice hills of Uganda, is that do we follow the path of having individual state policies on airspace? My response will be, let's go to East African community. I am a strong advocate of the East African integration, full integration, monetary, all the way to political integration, which people don't like. But as we approach that, we can, even economic, we can have a joint East Africa state agency, equivalent to what the Americans call NASA. Yeah, once we have this unified African agency, East African agency, then we will have a better bargaining power as we explore and go to the moon and go to space. And as we share space with other big brothers across the continent. So my approach is, let's go the East African way. Let's, our parliamentarians, I saw we had closer to 152 participants in this. And amongst them, we have members of parliament for Yala and aspiring members of Yala like Fiona Rwanda Rugari from Uganda, Kenneth Kilonzo from Kenya, and a few others I've seen their inboxes. So we should be talking to them so that we have this unified regulation. And there is always strength in unity. Madam Coordinator, I am sure you will agree with me on this. There's strength in unity in life. If we disintegrate, we will not talk like Japan. Japan will be going to the moon and China and taking investors there. We will still be fighting over a small cake here. Thank you.
I agree. I agree fully. Mr. Kasibante, I hope your question has been answered. I have seen Mr. Osric Luoga, you have two questions. I don't know whether there is any relation to our speaker, Karen Luoga. Osric, if you are available, just raise your hand so that you ask questions live. Remember, members, if you're if you would like to ask your to ask a question or to give any comments, you can raise your hand. Osric Luoga, please raise your hand. We allow you to talk. I can see you are on the call. As we are waiting for IT to locate Mr. Osric. Daktari, I can see there are several questions surrounding drones. We have a question from Stephen Ouma, who is asking about cross-border regulation of use of unmanned aerial devices, aerial vehicles in the East African community, noting that government agencies in Kenya, such as KRA, are now deploying the use of drones to various border points to curb tax evasion. And there was also another question by Sheila Chiza, who's an LLM student, asking what is the place of drones in air and space law in terms of regulation. Just put your finger on those two questions as we hear from Osric Luoga. Osric Luoga, unmute, and then you can ask your questions. Osric, just unmute and address us. Okay, in the meantime, Daktari, you can comment. Oh, yes, Osric is ready. Yes, Osric.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I had two questions for the presenter, especially Ms. Karen from Tanzania.
Yes.
I was inquiring on how would they harmonize regulatory overlapping regimes? For instance, the weather balloons, according to the Chicago Convention, it can be deemed as it can be deemed like something that is regulated by the Civil Aviation Authority here, but also the Tanzania Meteorological Authority also regulates the same instrument. What would be the position regarding this? And secondly, I was inquiring about the implementation or the current status or applicability of the ICAO's policy of the taxation of international air transport in East Africa.
Yes, Karen, over to you. Karen, unmute.
Can you repeat the second question?
My second question is regarding the applicability or current status of ICAO's policy of the taxation of international air transport in East Africa.
Thank you. I will start with the harmonization, the overlap of regulatory regime of meteorological and Tanzania civil aviation. Maybe it depends with what situation you're talking about, Osric. With the air balloons, what do you mean exactly?
First, registration of such a instrument, where does it fall? In the TCAA or the TMA? And in case of liabilities, what regulatory regime prevails?
Thank you. Tanzania's air balloons are considered as aircrafts, so they will be registered under the Tanzania Civil Aviation Authority. And the other one is the liability.
Yes.
The liability regime that will prevail will be our liability regime in Tanzania. So if there's any legal issues in relation to the operation of the balloons, our liability regime will prevail.
So as of currently, the TMA regulations are redundant.
I'm not saying that.
Isn't there a need for harmonization of these laws?
I believe we do. We do need harmonization of the air balloons.
Practically, currently, registration is not done at the TCAA, but rather at TMA.
For the operation of air balloons?
Yes.
I'll need to research more on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Osric, for that, those very enlightening questions. Now, maybe Daktari, you can answer the question on the two questions on the drones. Then after that, you can just give your closing remarks. Then we'll hear from Karen as she gives us her closing remarks. Then we'll wind up the session. Daktari? Daktari, you are still muted. Daktari.
Okay, sorry, Madam Chairperson. If you allow me a little latitude, there is 1 minute or so. We had Arnold Agomba from all the way from Montreal, McGill University. I've also seen Sandra Soy, a lecturer at the Kabarak University who lectures air and space law. They had some questions in the chat box, but they disappeared. If you use some discretion you have as a chair, give them half a minute each if they are still watching to quickly bring up these issues, because these are people actually dealing with life practice of air and space. And
okay. Raise your hands. The lecturer and let's see, what was your name?
Arnold Agomba, I think it's a student.
Arnold, you said Arnold Agaba?
Arnold Agambo. I suspect he's an LLM.
Yes, Arnold Agaba, yes. Unmute and address us, Mr. Abaka.
Okay,
Yes.
A very good morning from Montreal. I am Arnold Agaba. I am a Ugandan lawyer. I am a doctoral candidate at the Institute of Air and Space Law at McGill University. First of all, thank you for having this session. This is a very important area of practice, and we need to improve our capacity as the East African contingent, so that we are able to advise government, able to advise our practitioners in the area, and also to give services to clients. Now, the East African region is very notorious for having delays, lost baggage, overbooking on civil aviation flights within the region. I'd like Ms. Karen and perhaps Dr. Manana to talk about the applicability of consumer protection regulations at the East African level. Currently, we have those of 2006 under the East African Competition Act to civil aviation flights within the region. Do we have cases which, perhaps from Tanzania or from Kenya, where these regulations have been applied to issues of overbooking, issues of misleading advertisements, and so on and so forth? Thank you, and I look forward to your answers.
Thank you very much. Maybe we hear from Sandra Soy. Sandra Soy is a lecturer at Kabarak University teaching international air and space law. Then, Daktari, you will only get 5 minutes to answer the question because we have to keep time. Sandra, if you're still on the call, you can raise your hand for IT to
Yes.
be able to locate you easily. Yes, yes.
Yes, good
Half a
afternoon.
minute. The good doctor graciously interceded on your behalf. Half
Yes.
a minute.
Actually, I really didn't have a question. Mine was just a comment to thank the East Africa Law Society for organizing this forum. It has been very educative. That is all I had to say. Mine was not really a question.
Oh, thank you very much. We welcome comments and reactions. Yes, Dr. 5 minutes. As you answer the questions very briefly, you give us your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for allowing my intercession to the two speakers. You can see they are in the field. So please pass my regards to Professor Ambani, and my good friend Arnold, please pass regards to my friend Altur. We see each other in November in Montreal. Having said that, the issue of consumer protection, the laws are there. The East African individual states have, like Kenya has a law on the protect consumers against unfair trading. However, the delayed bookings, the overbookings at the airports, perhaps people are not enlightened and they keep on sleeping on their rights. The maxims of equity, they say the law does not eat and not. So we have not had cases, but we have had complaints, particularly at the airport, people complaining and registering their dissatisfaction. So issues of unfair trading are available, and it's only that we don't have time. I'll have shared instances where people have even moved to court domestically here, just to question the issue of unfair trading and the consumer under the Consumer Protection Act, which was enacted and is now enforceable in Kenya. The question on Sheila is spoken about the drones. As another gentleman who mentioned about the use of drones by Kenya Revenue Authority in monitoring tax evasions, and the law of the drones in East Africa. From the onset, I stated that each state, individual state, have their own domestic laws on drones. CASOA has not yet developed a harmonized regulation on drones in East Africa. That is a lacuna that we probably need to look into. And those of you who have read my publications have been arguing towards that direction of harmonization of the East African regulations. In regard to drones being used for the tax surveillance, that is true. The law, after the enactment of 2020 US regulation in June, empowers even the KWS. Some of them are now using it in to protect poaching in some of the game parks. The drones are now coming in handy, particularly in agricultural spraying. The drones are now being used in areas regarding to survey and mapping in large tracts of land. So really, sincerely speaking, and I must confess that when Professor Caspar Washford encouraged me to do this, to study this unit in 2015, then I did not know that it is an emerging area that is going to gain traction. But I want to be a prophet, not a prophet of doom, that as much as we say now, people are being only transported by manned aircraft, which have pilots. We foresee a future where drones will be transporting cargo and perhaps passengers. So the faster we move towards regional integration, the better towards the drone regulation. Drone is a common language, but the scholars will always insist on using remotely piloted aircraft, UOS, unmanned aircraft system, or the other word for the pilotless aircrafts. So having said that, I believe allow me to offer very quickly my final submission that I'm really impressed by the organizers, the conveners of this event. I bring lots of greetings, having been a panelist, ladies, very knowledgeable, amiable, and focused ladies. from my friends and the people who are interested in this area. As you realize that we have had actually a good number of participants participating on this inaugural, the East African Lawyers Conference. The last time we were speaking to people in East African Law Society annual conference in Zanzibar. I did it remotely because I was not able to travel. It was in regard to general business operations. So we are happy that the chair lady of and the convener thought it worthwhile that we must now start discussing this issue that probably people, now you can see Ogoba, a Ugandan lawyer, is in Montreal studying air and space law. My co-presenter here had to go to stay in Netherlands for almost 1 year and a half to study her air and space law. Now I'm happy that universities like Gabrag and others are now coming in to enlighten our people and encourage them, so that we want to start thinking globally, so that we don't, as much as we go to the magistrate courts, let's also have this comparative advantage of competing at the international stage, and competing at international stage also catching up with the technology that's emerging, and how do we then dance at the stage of international arena and make impact of sustainable development at our respective countries. As we do so, we must be alive that if we don't shape up, we'll be shipped out because of the technological advancement that is taking. Now, lawyers' opportunities, we have discussed them in a wrap-up, and a lot of opportunities out there for people who have specialized in air and space law. Well, with those very many remarks, I must convey my gratitude to the CEO of the East African Law Society, my good friend, and the entire team for the wonderful work, and my co-presenter, Karen. We look forward to seeing you in Kenya soon to do presentation. As I said earlier, the field of international air law and space law has very few experts. We need more experts. We really encourage people to enroll. Please be encouraged. I know my good friend Idi Pembere from the state law office in Nairobi has been on my neck. Please, we encourage those who are willing, come forward, and there is always a better future for all of us. God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karen, can we get your closing remarks? Unmute.
Thank you. I would like to thank the East Africa Law Society for an opportunity to have this discussion on air and space law. As we know, air and space law, it's a unique area in law. I would like to see more of these discussions in the future, and thank you for all the participants for the insightful questions. In this industry, we learn every day, so I've grabbed 1 or 2 things during the question sessions. Again, thank you very much, Asante.
Thank you very much to our panelists for today, and let me convey greetings from the President of the East African Law Society, Mr. Bernard Malingu, and from the CEO and from the entire council. And we would like to thank you for participating in this webinar. For those ones who are asking whether the presentation can be shared, I think the slides will be shared via email. However, this is a recorded session and it was being beamed live on Facebook, and the ELS also has a YouTube channel where all our webinars are. You can go to the YouTube channel and you will access all the webinars. And special thanks to the team at the Secretariat for their support. So with that, we wish you a very good afternoon. And on a light note, you have heard our speaker, Dr. Manana, greeting everyone. Here in Kenya, the people who come from his part, where he comes from, they are very well known for their greetings. So we really appreciate that. So with that, we have come to the end of this webinar. Both our panelists are on LinkedIn, so if you would like to contact them, you can reach out to them on LinkedIn. So again, from the East African Law Society Women Lawyers Committee, we thank you once again. And until next time, goodbye and have a good afternoon. Thank you.